Hello, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host of Fiberchats. Welcome to my channel. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And my guest today is Rick from WhimzeeStitches. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Irina. How are you?
Good. So let's start with two female names that you don't like, I guess. Katrina and Ida.
Oh, yeah,
So we
absolutely.
basically planned this interview before Ida hit. And it was supposed to be this, fun event, but then your home got damaged, you had to evacuate. Um, and this is the second time it's happening. This is not the
Yes.
first major hurricane you're living through.
No, it's not. And I still have a smile on my face.
Does it ever make you wanna move away from New Orleans? What it is about New Orleans that you love so much that you wanna to come back there and stay there, even
You
with
know,
all bad things happening?
there's the easy answer and then there's the hard answer to that question. And when you've been someplace for 20 years or more, it's hard just to pick up your life and go somewhere else. It's hard to say, what do you get rid of? What do you stop doing? What do and where do you go?
Right.
When you don't really, you don't have another place that you have a home or a second home or something where you're comfortable and you know all about that place. So, New Orleans is its own unique place. It is certainly not for everybody. I moved there at a time in my life where, I was going through a change from the corporate world in New York where I grew up, and I had just finished my MBA program and I was working for a big corporation and traveling, and I found that that just wasn't for me. And so when I moved to New Orleans, it's a slower pace of life, good food, good drinks, good people, and I made a life there. And through the years, my careers have changed, and eventually I found this, and this has probably been the happiest I've ever been. So I think that keeps me going, keeps me there, as a home base. I'm comfortable in my home. I have a nice space to work in, a very low overhead, and that, it's hard to say go somewhere else. Am I going to find a house that is going to be similar, or I can set up a shop and do the things that I do out of the base in New Orleans. But I know every day for the last 12 days, I've asked myself, why am I still there?
Well, I mean, I go through the same thing because I'm in Boston, and every time there is a major snowstorm, I'm like, why? Like, I could have
Yeah,
lived anywhere. Like, why did I have to build my life here?
absolutely.
So let me ask you about how you got into the from corporate world into dyeing yarn into sewing bags.
Okay.
Like, how did you find yourself there?
I've always been a crafty person. Growing up, I was always around sewing and fabrics, even as a young child. My mom sews. She made clothes for us and for her mom and for herself. So I was always going to fabric stores with my mom and my grandmother. I'd be running around up and down the aisles, so I was very familiar with all of that. And of course, she taught me how to sew very early on in life. Um, but through the years, things change. You don't think of that as a career,
Right.
especially as a young boy. You don't think of that, oh, you can make a career in sewing. Um, and so, of course, I went to college and graduate school, and I was going to follow a technology corporate track. Um, but crafting was always there. I was always sewing. I was always making things. I was always doing something. Um, so I don't know where it was. I think it was after Katrina. After Katrina, I was like, "Ugh, I need to find some more hobbies. I need to start doing things again." So I started crafting again. I started crocheting, but I had really bad carpal tunnel. So it kind of came and went. And then somewhere around, I don't know, maybe it was somewhere around 2013, 12, 13, somewhere around there. I was like, okay, let me pick this up again. Picked it up again, and that's when I realized I want to learn how to knit. I never learned how to knit, and at the time, I was a part of a quilting group. Um, I was quilting because my mom was quilting, so I was quilting, and it was, it gave me something to do,
Right.
um, especially the weekends, the evenings, that kind of thing. I wasn't very serious about it because quilting is a lot of work, but I was doing it. And so my quilting group, there was one gal there that who who she crocheted a lot during our meetings, and she says, and I said to her, I says, I really want to learn how to knit. Do you know how to knit? She says, yes and no. But she says, you should come to our stitching group on Wednesdays. And she says, there's the lady there named Donna, and she'll teach you. And I says, really? And she says, yeah. So I went, showed up with needles and yarn, and she showed me how to cast on, how to knit, how to purl, and I made a dishcloth. That dishcloth was not square or rectangular. It was kind of triangular with little points and different things. And there was a couple of stitches ripped out, so there was holes in it. But I did it, and I just kept going after that. And then it must have been a year or two after that that I started discovering YouTube channels and podcasts, and I started watching two podcasts that I really, really enjoyed. Well, two or three. The first one was, God, I cannot remember their names. They were out of the Arizona area, um, Kim and Kim and somebody else. And they no longer podcast, but they were just two funny friends who just chatted and knitted. And, I messaged them a few times and said, hey, oh my God, I've been to that shop that y'all knit at, and that kind of thing in the Phoenix area. And then I also watched my friends, Daniela and Allie, who are based out of Cookeville, Tennessee. And they no longer podcast, but Daniela still does an occasional podcast. It's called Caffeinated Crafting with Daniela. And they've become very dear friends of mine. And I visit them as often as I can. So through these podcasts and everything, I started learning about retreats and different things. And I signed up for a retreat in Tennessee, and I went. And that's where I was like, oh my God, this is so fun. But that's when I discovered little bags. And I was like, well, I can make little bags,
Right.
just simple fabric, drawstring. There's nothing to them, little ribbon. I mean, this is one of my first bags. It even has one of my first homemade little labels that I did with an inkjet printer and ironed on to some ribbon. And I was like, oh, I can do this. And and then I also was like, well, I could do something better. So that's when I started doing these clear bags. And they're also drawstring, but this is a large bag, by the way. I do make a smaller version of this. It's more for a single skein. And I started making those, and I brought a whole bunch to the retreat, and I just gave them away. They were door prizes, whatever, gave them away. And then all of a sudden people started contacting me and say, hey, can you make me this? Can you do this? Do you have fabric that looks like this? And of course, I've got a ton of fabric.
Well, let
My
me
guy is a
ask you for a
quilter.
second. So you already had like everything set up for those bags, basically, right?
More
Because
or less, yes. Because I was quilting, I had tons of fabric. I had the space, the sewing machine, et cetera, et cetera. I just didn't have the time because I was working a full-time job.
right.
So this was more or less evenings and weekends. But very quickly it turned into, I was like, oh, huh, I'm getting orders. I'm like, I'm actually making money at this. I'm like, well, if I put a little bit more time into it and invest and schedule shows and different things. So that's kind of how it started. And I think in 2015, or maybe it was 2016, I'm trying to remember. I think it was 2015. I did my first show, and it was a local, well, 3 hours away, 3 hours from home in Mississippi. They had a show, and it was like a 2 day, fiber festival, and
So
with
how did that go?
classes.
What was the reception? Was
It was very good. It was very, very good. I was elated. I was like, oh my God, people like my bags. They like my stuff. At the time, I wasn't dyeing any yarn.
right.
Um, but it was good. It got me thinking. And I think within a year, I decided, I had scheduled myself to do a retreat, a couple other shows, smaller shows, and a couple different retreats. And that kind of is how I guess I grew my brand and my name. And about a year later, I decided to quit my job and do this full time.
So when you went to the first yarn festival, to the first whatever festival, craft festival, right? Was that when you discovered the yarns? Like when was the light bulb about yarns going on in your head?
That was a progression. The first time I went to like an actual like big yarn show, I think it was Stitches South, and that was in Nashville. And my friend Daniela came, and I met up with another friend of mine, and it was overload. And I came home probably with more purchased yarn than anything. And when I get into something, I kind of get very obsessed about it.
Right.
And not really having any plan for anything. So I've got all this yarn that I bought, and I'm like, I have zero idea what I'm doing with it.
Right.
And it wasn't until it probably wasn't until it wasn't until I was full-time in the business, maybe 2 years, that I realized that bags are great, but people only buy so many bags. Yarn, they'll repurchase. They in order to make things, you need more yarn.
Right.
So I says, well, I need to kind of diversify. I need to add that. But I always said to myself, I wasn't going to dye yarn because it's a lot more work. It's hard. It's hard work.
It is, yeah.
It's very labor intensive. You have to have the time. You have to have the patience. You have to have, the funds to do it. So it wasn't until I think around 2017 that I actually started dyeing yarn and released my first yarn. It was debuted at the SSK retreat in Nashville that they do every summer in July. And,
do you remember that color?
And it was received well. My first special color was called "You Rock My World," and I wish I had them with me. I have a pair of socks that I made from it, because you have to keep your first ever anything.
Right.
But since then, I've done a lot more.
Do you have when you started dyeing, was it sort of like when you dye it comes out the way you imagined, or was it never the way you imagined?
Nope. I honestly didn't know what I was doing. I watched YouTubes, read some books, read some websites, different things, experimented. Prior to that, my only experimentation with yarn dyeing was with a friend of mine in Nashville, and we went to that Stitches South show. She had done some yarn dyeing, just, kettle kind of pot dyeing on the stove. And we played around that weekend, and I did some dyeing. And actually those 3 skeins of yarn I used to make my if I can reach my phone, to make my my Stephen West shawl. Which one was it? Oh Lord, what was the name of it? It was not I think it was the Mystery Knit Along last year.
That's not this. What's the name?
I can't remember the name of it.
We'll look it up.
Yes. Anyway, those 3 skeins of yarn I used, plus I added oh God, it's escaping my mind. Not Surrey, but the other hairy fiber.
Like mohair?
Mohair, thank you. I've added a mohair to it. That was the only addition to it. But yeah, so I had fun dyeing those yarns. I have no idea what I was doing. So I had no way to replicate those yarns because, we were just playing with color and the dye pots. But since then, I've developed my techniques and different things. And I do small batch. I don't do production dyeing. So I will never produce hundreds of skeins of yarn for any one thing. Right. So my first true love is the sewing. I love to sew and make bags. It's just it's where I'm comfortable at.
Do you ever get tired of it? Just because it seems like you're doing certain things, right? You're doing bags. So there is, let's say, a few variations of the bags, but at the end of the day, it's still mostly bags. Do you ever get tired of doing the same thing? Do you want to go into like make a wedding dress or something like crazy? I
No,
don't know.
no, that would never happen. Um, when you develop a business, I think it's about routine. It's about having something to do, something to go to that keeps you consistently busy. And for me, consistency is important, that I have a schedule Monday through Friday. I try to work normal hours, like as if I was just a normal working person out in the world. And I keep those hours so that I don't get bored. And it's never boring, trust me. There's always something that comes up. There's always something new. There's always, you know, there might be an issue, or there might be, a shipping thing, or there might be, Etsy might throw something and say, oh, we're going to change the way we do business with you. And, all of a sudden you have to, rethink things.
Right,
Instagram is a full-time job. It truly is. I mean, that's a constant changing factor in the business world.
right.
Social media, period. I mean, just making time to do things like this, trying to, develop, new marketing techniques. I was doing Instagram lives last year during the pandemic, and that was a way for me to keep connected, but also a way for me to showcase newer things and what I was up to. And eventually that kind of, just whittled its way down. And people went back to work, so they weren't watching as much.
Well, let's talk about COVID. So you started the new business. It's received very positively. You're on the roll. You're doing it full time. Then COVID hits. How did that, how did you adjust to that? Like how easy or how hard it was? Did you find some new
initially
things?
initially like the first 6 months of it in 2020, it wasn't that difficult to adjust to, other than saying, how am I going to replace the missing show dollars? Since all the shows and retreats were canceled, it was like, oh my God, you kind of panic for a minute.
Right,
Because when you look at your numbers and you say, well, where does your income come from? And if most of it comes from shows, you all of a sudden will panic that, oh my God, I have zero income now. And the way they were talking and scaring everybody, it was like, this is never going to happen again.
right.
And there were a lot of virtual events that were coming out and happening, but they were not really like very or well organized, let's just say. They were, smaller independent type people that were putting them together. They were fine. I did a few. I found that they were a little bit more work than I thought was worth in the end. But so that's when I started doing my own thing, and it seemed to have worked better for me and my business.
Right.
And then as the COVID, the whole pandemic, worked its way through, and winter came, um, sales go up, sales go down. Um, I kind of took a back seat to yarn dyeing during the whole pandemic, which probably was not the best decision. But for me at the time, I found that was better for me in my headspace. As I said, I'm most comfortable doing the sewing. And, during that whole time period as well, I had some other things going on where, I was, spending money on my home because I had my air conditioning system needed to be replaced, um, things of that nature. So those things kind of take over
Right.
your capacities. And that's where I was like, oh,
Well, there was
that's
one time when you went live on Instagram and I was watching it, and you seemed like, I don't want to say depressed, but you were like really down, and you were sharing that with like all your followers, and you were saying how it's like you find it hard to continue and to like to find the way to smile and to bring the smile on your face, and deal with this whole being staying stuck at home, and and how like you were planning to make the best Christmas out of it just because you didn't know how long you've got to live. So it was that
Right.
sort of like very raw, very emotional kind of.
Sure.
Um,
You go through things, and sometimes you need an escape, you need an outlet. And working for yourself and working alone, I don't have employees. You don't have anyone to talk to all day long. And this is a lonely business. It truly is. And the shows for me were my outlet. They were my connection to people. They were my face-to-face time. They were my connection with the knitting world and with, all the fiber and everything that comes with it. And that had all disappeared. The Zooms and all that kind of stuff just weren't cutting it for me.
right.
I didn't feel connected to people. I did have my one group that I would do every week, and it was a small group, and that was nice. But the larger Zoom meetings and things, I didn't find a connection with it. I found it was way too chaotic for me.
Right.
And that's probably because I'm more of an introvert than I really understand myself to be.
So then as soon as you basically like lift your head a little bit and things start getting better, things start opening up, IDA's happening. Do you feel like it's just like endless trouble all the time? Like, or do you have some sort of silver lining that you always find?
I think I don't consider it to be like trouble all the time. I think of it as more of a bump in the road. Life takes you in many different directions. You don't know what's coming tomorrow, because if you did, then you would, I guess, you must be some guru or something.
Right.
But nobody knows what's coming tomorrow. Nobody knows what's coming in the next 10 minutes. um there's surprises everywhere. um I fully believe that what you put into something you receive back. So I put in my heart and soul into everything that I do, and I hope that I receive that back from everything. And so far, that's worked well for me. I am who I am. I don't hide or change who I am when I'm on screen or on my Instagram. I don't have a perfectly curated anything. It's real. Everything I post is real. And I think, the truth, as far as I understand, has never killed or hurt anybody. It may be hard to swallow sometimes, but the truth is always best.
How was so you announced that like Ida is knocking on our door and I'm about to lose electricity and that's going to be the last you've seen of me. And so basically all the orders that you had at that point had to be put on hold.
Hmm.
Were people supportive about that? Were people
Yes.
telling you don't worry about it?
I, you know, I strive myself to fulfill orders within a day of receiving them. Sometimes I ship them out the same day. So I don't let my orders just sit there. And the way I operate my business is, once I post something that, I have this, it's available in the shop. And until it sells out, it's there. It's not, I don't really do made to order. I only do that on occasion. I do some custom orders, and most of the time people that are asking for a custom order understand that there's a process involved. It's not an immediate thing. Um, and if they want something bad enough, they'll wait for it. So I do have a couple of orders that I wasn't able to finish before Ida hit. And of course, I reach out to these people immediately and say, hey, this is what's happening. Two options: you can wait, which I don't have a time frame, or I can cancel and refund you. Everybody will wait is the response. Even with orders that are pending, that are for ready-made items, they said they'll wait. They have no problem. They're not in a rush
Were
to
you
receive these
surprised
things.
at all, or did you
No,
expect
I'm
that?
not surprised. I'm not surprised, because honestly, I think I mean, the old adage is true. You get 80% of your business from 20% of your customers, and the 20% customers are your repeat customers. These are people who love your work, they love your product, they know who you are, they know what goes into it. So they're very supportive.
Right. A week from now, hopefully, you're going to be back in your home. And hopefully, there's electricity and everything. You can start putting your life back together. Do you plan anything? Or you like at this point, let me just figure out every day, one day at a time?
Um, you know, right now there was a lot of plans because I had fall in-person shows that were scheduled. One of them being a pretty large show in Asheville. It's called SAF, the Southeastern Animal Fiber Festival.
Yeah.
And it's like towards the end of October, somewhere around the 22nd, 23rd of October. And that's a big show for me. I have a double booth space that I'm supposed to fill. And at this point, I don't have enough product to put in that booth. So the plan is to go back home and make as much stuff as I can, you know, and do the best that I can to have enough product. I have a very large yarn order that is sitting in limbo somewhere in Rochester, New York, because FedEx can't keep pushing it to New Orleans because they're not accepting any deliveries in New Orleans. So I'm hoping that it will stay there and eventually work its way over. And as soon as that arrives, I can do more yarn dyeing and and have fall colors. Although although it seems to me in my brain when I look at Instagram and I'm scrolling and I'm seeing everybody with their fall colors out already, now I feel like I'm late to the game. So it's like, okay, do I do fall or do I do something else? And sometimes that's hard, you know. It's like, you know, it's also almost like taking a dart and closing your eyes and, you know, throwing it towards a target and hoping that you hit something.
Do you question yourself like all the time? Do you criticize yourself all the time? Are you
Oh,
like the hardest
absolutely.
person on yourself?
Absolutely. I'm way too hard on myself, and people tell me that all the time. Rick, you're way too hard on yourself. Stop. You know, your stuff is great. You do a wonderful job. You have a great sense of color, you know. But I constantly criticize myself and the things that I make. It's just who I am. I think it's my growing up.
But do you think like that sort of like expectancy of profession of being perfect in everything you do you think it also drives you to be the best that you can?
Of course. I mean, doesn't I mean, I don't think everybody wants to, but it's just who I am. It's just my work ethic. You know, I do want to do the best that I can. I certainly don't want to deliver a sub, you know, par product.
Do you ever
You know,
make something and you're not 100%
oh, absolutely. Oh,
proud of it?
I've trashed many of things, and you know, it's costly and it hurts. But you know, sometimes you think of something, you dream of something, and you start implementing it, and you realize this isn't really coming out the way I thought it would. It's not really coming together the way I thought it would come together. And you know, and sometimes I'm in a rush, and that's the worst thing you could be doing, is to rush through,
Right.
because that you can't do that. Sewing is not a rush thing. You have to do it the way it's, you know, it's supposed to be done. Otherwise, it'll rip apart.
Right. So there is another thing that I noticed about you specifically, where you do sort of matching yarn dyeing to the fabric that you use for the project bags. And it's actually like super cute because like sometimes you have this like the craziest, funkiest fabric, but then when you see it in yarn, it's like totally gives you like some new idea of how to use it. And it's like you see the bag in the different way. Do you do that? Like, do you try to sell them together or do you draw inspiration from fabrics to dye a yarn?
I think I'm first and foremost a fabric whore, and even today after we're done, I'm going to two quilt shops that are nearby, because if I'm not around it, I feel like I feel like I'm not, I don't have my energy source. And even just going to a shop, even if I don't buy anything or I buy 3 fat quarters instead of yards of fabric, I feel like I've done something. I feel like I've replenished myself in some way. So yes, I do draw a lot of my color inspiration for dyeing from fabric. Fabric photos are a big thing. My biggest things are nature, flowers, travel. But I find it fun and challenging to do the matchy, the yarn and the bags, because there have been hits and there have been misses with that. And I think as you develop your techniques and everything, those things will change. I don't have the bag with me, but I do have the yarn with me. um, this I did over the summer after I came back from Greece. I did a whole bumblebee bag series, and I did dye up a honeycomb color that was, and I sold it as a sock kit with some black yarn. And I think it also helps when you have some sort of sample going to help people visualize, well, what is this going to look like? And so that this is one of those colorways that I did. And I really like it. And it's probably easier to see how it looks knit up from the backside, where it's just plain stockinette. I, you know, I don't know how can I say this? Because I enjoy doing small batch everything. I tend to kind of pigeonhole myself into a set amount of everything. And usually that is based on how much fabric I have. So if I only have X yards of fabric, I can only make so many bags. So then that determines kind of how many pieces, how much yarn I dye, and thinking, okay, that's going to be it. And then what happens, well, this is probably a good problem to have, is people are like, well, do you have any more? And I'm like, no. So that's when if I can confidently repeat the colorway, I'll open up pre-orders.
Do you write everything down, measure everything down,
No,
photograph the process, or you
no.
improvise?
I improvise because I think, as you know, there are people who are very engineering background based and write everything down, and everything's a percentage and it's exact and it's this and it's measured and everything. The only thing I measure is my coffee. But when it comes to this, I'm not an exact person when it comes to it. And that may be the fault that I have with it. But I also think, the happy accidents that happen because you're not striving for the exact perfection every time is sometimes a good result.
Right.
And I really do think that, having stuff available in a limited series is better. There's only that, and that's it.
Right. So you're going to the shop, to the fabric shop, and you see, hundreds of them, right? How do you pick? When you pick the fabric, do you think about like what potential customers might like, or you go by what you love?
Both. It's, I have to stop buying just for things that I love or I like only, because what things that I like, other people don't like. And I try not to be too trendy, because trends, sometimes don't last. And, you know, I understand that there are popular things happening all the time. And, and sometimes you have to cave in a little bit to that. But I've also found that when I do cave into those things because it's not my love, or it's not my passion, or I'm not familiar with that trend or topic, I find that it kind of bites me in the ass, because it's like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. And my cat's in here, by the way. That's who's meowing.
I have three, so don't even worry about that.
So she's and she's traumatized from this. This is like, what is this, our fourth place we've been with her.
You did this whole series of Pride bags and Pride yarn kits, and I think it like June, right? Right.
Yes.
Do you ever get negative reaction from being openly gay, from doing that whole Pride on your Instagram, right? Like where you advertise all your kits and everything, or do you always get supportive reaction to that?
I would say overwhelmingly it's more supportive than it is negative. I'm not saying there aren't negative experiences or negative times. They do happen. I don't dwell on them, because I live my life, you live your life. I don't care what you do, or what your what your beliefs are, your stands, or political affiliations. I really don't care. It doesn't affect my life who you vote for, or what what religion you follow, or that you believe that I'm good or evil. I really, quite honestly, just don't give a shit. And I mean, if you dwell on it, it's not positive. It's not a good thing to do. I feel that when I produce things and I affiliate it with, with an identity, and that identity is me, because I'm a gay man, I'm an out and open gay man.
Right.
And I feel that, if I do this and people support it, and somehow this, contributes to a better cause, then I think it's a win-win.
Right.
My small contribution to it, in comparison to what other brands could be doing, but I feel I can do what I can.
Right. And it's similar question, like basically continuation of the same question, but do people ever give you hard time for sewing, for knitting in public, for wearing your needs, any of that stuff? Or you also just to
Not
ignore it?
really. I ignore it for the most part. Maybe early on I was a little less comfortable with it, but through the years I turned a blind eye to it. It you get looks all the time. As a male knitter, you will get looks from people. Most of the time, the looks come from men who are like, wow, it's more of a surprise thing. It isn't a negative thing. Maybe it's a jealousy thing. I don't know. Maybe they feel like, oh my God, that's something my grandmother did, or that's something my mom did, but I never learned, or maybe I should have, so it gets them thinking. The women, for the most part, are very supportive. But I'm going to say that for the most part, there still is that stereotype out there. As a shop owner and creator, I've had many experiences where I do shows in my booth, and sometimes I'll have helpers in my booth, friends of mine from around the country that will help me, and most of the time they're female.
Right.
There are many experiences where females will come to the booth and will gravitate towards the female worker in the booth. And when they refer them to me saying, well, he's the sewer, he's the owner, this is everything in here he made, they're kind of speechless. And so there's still that I don't want to call it a stigma, because it's really not a stigmatism, but there's still that
Conception.
yeah, there really is. And I think it's changed over the years, but it still does exist. I mean, there's still times where I might read something and it kind of tickles me a little bit, because someone will post something and say ladies, instead of
Right.
referring that everybody in the group is a lady maker.
Right.
And that's not true.
Well, that's so funny because when, like we organized this group on Facebook called Knitters Gonna Knit, and that was the very first thing. Like I invited every guy I know to the group, they all joined. And then of course the very first post goes, welcome ladies, and I was like, I just invited every man
Yeah.
I personally knew to the group, and here we go, So it's definitely takes time, and I don't even think that those women mean it that way, but there is
No,
like a lot of
I
people
don't
who
think it's
guys,
intentional.
right,
It's not intentional. It's just, maybe they, have an experience. They don't have men in their knitting group, or maybe they
right.
don't have any association with male knitters. So it's the same thing in the quilting world. Same exact thing in the quilting world. I
Well,
mean,
when
I
you
walk,
go to those quilting circles, right, or the retreat, are people surprised that you're there? Do they
yes.
question?
Oh, absolutely. At one point, I was the only male knitter at a retreat, and amongst, 90 women. I mean, yeah, I had to go hide in my room a little bit because it was too much estrogen, but it's no different than going to a gay retreat of some
Right,
sort. There's only so much of that you can take too.
right, right. Do you have like project bags that you finish and you're like, I just can't release it to the public because I must have it for myself?
Yes, but most of the time I have enough that I can keep one and sell the rest. I have trained myself not to do that anymore, because I can just say it's just fabric, you know, I can do whatever I want.
Right. Is there like one project bag that you would never sell?
I don't know, is that a loaded question?
No.
I don't know. I mean, there have been project bags that I see out there in the world that, people ask me to make. And I say to them, well, I don't want to make that because somebody else is. So
Right.
why do I want to recreate somebody else's bag? Not that some of my bags aren't any different than anybody else's, but I certainly I'm not one to take what others are already making and copy what they make. Even though I fully believe that, replication is a big form of flattery. Um, and but I kind of I stick to what I have developed for myself. Um, and it seems to work well. Um, anytime I anytime I listen to somebody else's suggestions, and it kind of backfires on me a little bit, you know. So
Well, there's this thing that I've been mulling over like lately somehow as to what makes your design your design. And the reason why I was playing with this, so usually, like I only started knitting 4 years ago, so I still consider myself relatively new, and I always followed somebody's patterns. And now I sort of got to the point of self-confidence, I guess, where I'm like, okay, let me just play with it. Let me just take this yarn. And some people get to that point, like, 3 months after they learned how to knit and purl. It took me 4 years, but like I got there now. So I made this shawl and I wasn't following any pattern. I put the sections together from my head, but all those sections exist. They're like from Stitch Dictionary, right? So like nothing is new there.
mhm,
And I was quite like I posted it on Insta and I said, well, is it my design? Like, did I design this? And it's funny because when I was talking to Ronnie from Inspired Fiberworks, she was telling me the story of her son Colin, who knitted the 2x2 rib hat from his head, and he was like, is that my design, right? And I felt like the same way,
mhm,
because like, where do you draw the line? Like, what
right.
makes your bag your design versus you saw this bag someplace else and you made the same from your fabric? Like, does picking fabric and picking the color of the thread makes it your
I,
design?
I don't consider myself really a designer of anything. I may have developed, this bag for myself, and it's kind of I have my technique of creating it, but by no means is it, something that anybody else couldn't replicate, or was there a pattern for it? No, I do get asked for, from sewers, do you have a pattern for that? And I tell them I don't. I said it's really simple, to be honest. It's two pieces of fabric and some vinyl. There's really nothing to it.
Have you ever
um,
considered teaching others how to sew, how to like
no,
create your
I'll never do that.
bag?
I did teach some when I was quilting. I was very heavily involved in machine embroidery, and there is a sophisticated piece of software that allows you to digitize pictures and graphics into sewing embroidery, which the machine would then embroider that into the fabric.
Right.
And a shop that I was familiar with and affiliated with, and purchased from, they says, well, would you be willing to teach the software? Because it's a $2,500 piece of software, and these ladies mostly that were buying them that are very afraid of computers. They're in their 60s, 50s and 60s and 70s, and they're just, they're afraid if they click the wrong thing, the computer's going to blow up.
Right.
And so I would take Saturday mornings and I'd go sit with them for 3 hours and teach classes. And I did that for several years. But to be honest with you, it's grueling.
Right.
Teaching is not easy, because everybody's at a different level, everybody's at a different comfort zone. Some people just whip right through it and can get the technique and do it, and others struggle and struggle and struggle, and you have to have the patience to hold their hand, calm them down, say it's going to be okay, this is what you need to do. you
Right.
know and sometimes people also overestimate their capabilities, or they think that they can take something very complex And when you explain to them, well, this is a keep it simple, stupid concept. The more simple it is, the easier it's going to be. Can
Right.
we simplify something complex? Yes, but it's going to take a lot more time. So, and it's the same thing with this, with fabric, with sewing, with anything, and cooking. I mean, whose recipe is whose recipe,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then
Um,
chicken Parmesan is chicken Parmesan.
well, it's funny because yeah, like I have a friend who wrote cookbook and it's all like traditional Indian recipes that she put in her cookbook. So it's like just the fact that she put the exact amount of spices that she used doesn't make it her recipe, you know. So
Right,
it's like you can
right.
start questioning everything then.
Yeah,
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with me today and
you're
for
welcome.
chatting with me. And I hope that you'll find your home in a somewhat same state as you left it. And I hope
It's not in a bad state. I was there through the storm, so I was able to survey the damage after. There isn't a ton of damage. It's, there is some, but with anything like after a storm or after a disaster, there's a whole process that you have to go through.
right,
And when it's at the magnitude that it is, you have to have a lot more patience because you can't get through to the phone, you can't get through to your agents, you have to wait for them to get back to you. And then if you're not home, if there's other complications. And so you just have to have a little bit more patience. But as with every, you can fix it. It's okay.
right.
It's not the end of the world.
Well, I hope Ida was the last bad storm for a long, long while, you know.
Well, there's a little restaurant that's just across the street from our hotel room that we saw yesterday, and my boyfriend Garrett, who's with me, he said, "Oh, look, it's Ida. I declare is the name of the restaurant." And I says, "Oh, well, maybe we should go there." And I looked it up, and I was like, "Oh, $27 for fried chicken. I don't think we're going there."
Enough of Ida.
Yes, enough of Ida.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest. I'm glad we got to talk, even though you're not home and even though everything went not how it was planned, but I'm glad we still got to chat about it.
Perfect. I wouldn't mind doing it again from my home studio so I can give you all a grand tour and
Yeah, we
see
should do the
everything.
update once you're back.
Absolutely. We'll do the post Ida update.
Great.